Good morning, host.
Morning, SG.
We seem to be having a technical problem.
Is that what Kurasha is?
Yes, I didn't realize that I was muted. I had unmuted. Probably I was muted by mistake. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We can hear you perfectly, sir.
My apologies. I had gone quite some distance, not realizing that I was muted. Thank you, SG, for alerting that. Welcome, honorable members, our partners, our stakeholders to this regional webinar, where we're going to be focusing on enhancing the role of Parliament in the protection and promotion of human rights in the SADC region through engagement with national and regional human rights state and non-state actors. As I had indicated earlier, my name is Shaunen Kurasha. I'm the program manager for democracy and governance. I'm also in charge of the parliamentary business for the SADC Parliamentary Forum. I'm honored to be your master of ceremonies for the official opening session. Let me do a bit of protocol by recognizing the chairperson of the Democratization, Governance and Human Rights Standing Committee, Honorable Augustino. In absentia, she's briefed and will be represented ably by the Vice Chairperson, Honorable Darren Beckman. I also wish to recognize him this morning. Allow me to recognize chairpersons of all SADC PF standing committees who are in the meeting and other members of SADC PF standing committees. We are honored to have you in the meeting. I also wish to recognize the Secretary General, Madame Boyemo Sekoma, Mr. Depros Mchena, the Director for Amnesty International Eastern and Southern Africa Office. Allow me to recognize Mr. Luis Potenai, the Chairperson of Mozambique National Commission on Human Rights, Advocate John Waters, the Ombudsman for Namibia, Mr. Raile Rabonoro, President of the Independent National Commission on Human Rights of Madagascar, all distinguished panelists and resource persons, representatives of the media, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. I wish to introduce you to the program before we begin our session. Host, can I share screen? Host, kindly assist. While host is sorting us out, we have circulated the agenda. It's a whole day program where we starting at 9:30 with the official opening session. And during this official opening session, we'll have welcome remarks from the Secretary General, Madame Boyemo Sekoma, and remarks from Mr. Depros Mchena, the Director of Amnesty International Eastern and Southern Africa Office. We will also have the official opening speech by the chairperson, which will be delivered by the Vice Chairperson, Honorable Darren Beckman. Then our first session will start with a presentation on state of human rights in Southern Africa, an analysis of key trends. This will be delivered by Mr. Mchena. And then at 11:30 to 12:30, we'll have our first panel discussion focusing on national human rights institutions and parliaments, perspectives on participation and engagement, which I will have the honor of moderating, and it will have Mr. Luis Biton Nahe, the chairperson of the Mozambique National Commission on Human Rights. It also have Advocate Waters, the Ombudsman of Namibia, and Mireille Rabonoro, the president of the Independent National Commission on Human Rights of Madagascar. The second panel will have lunch break, and then we'll resume at 18:30. We'll have a second panel which will focus on civil society, human rights defenders, and parliament, perspectives on participation and engagement. And this session will be moderated by Tseke Kasambala, Chief of Party Advancing Rights in Southern Africa, program Freedom House. And the panelists, we will have Mbolatiana Raveloa Rimisa, human rights and social justice defender from Madagascar. Then we'll have Mr. Stanley Nyamanindi, the SADC Lawyers Association Chief Executive Officer. We have two panelists that have pulled out, unfortunately, due to other commitments. We will see if we will be able to secure another panelist to join this panel. 14:30 to 15:30, we'll have our third panel, COVID and Human Rights in Southern Africa, Pathways for a Gender-Just Recovery and Future Resilience. We'll have the honor of having Madame Madzwamuse Maseho, the Chief Executive Officer of Southern Africa Trust, to moderate this session. And it will have David Martine, Amnesty International Southern Africa. It will have Dales Judge, from Country Director for Zambia. It also have Mary Pias da Silva, Foundation for Social Economic Justice from Eswatini. And lastly, it will have Talent Dumo from Katswe Sisterhood in Zimbabwe. Then we will have a report back session with our rapporteur, the Ebo Tigere Chakuta, the Deputy Regional Director for Campaigns, Amnesty International. Then we will have a statement on renewing commitments and galvanizing action by the chairperson of the DG committee, Honorable Bergman. And he will also take the opportunity to close and deliver a vote of thanks and close the meeting. That's our program for this morning. And without any further ado, let us commence with by inviting the Secretary General, Madame Sehoma, to deliver a welcome remarks. Over to you, Madame.
I believe I'm mute. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Director of Ceremonies, dear honorable members, the chairpersons of the various committees, and in particular, the one for democracy, governance, and human rights, my colleagues, distinguished colleagues from civil society organizations, Mr. Depros Mochena, and Mr. Stanley, and other participants, allow me to thank you for your generosity in finding time from your obviously busy schedules, both business and private, to honor our invitation to be part of this capacity development and necessary discussion that brings together intelligentsia, brings together practitioners in this area, and brings together members of parliament from the SADC Parliamentary Forum. It's with great pleasure and satisfaction that I also find time to tender my welcome remarks and address this August gathering on the leveraging of parliaments for the protection and promotion of human rights in Southern Africa. As you may be aware, honorable members, the protection of human rights is one of the main axes of intervention of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, and it is expressly provided for in our strategic plan of 2019 to 2023, along with core notions such as enabling gender equality, promoting women empowerment, among others. In addition, honorable members, the forum implements human rights in a cross-cutting and holistic manner. Indeed, although the forum has a dedicated standing committee on human rights, other standing committees also fully implement human rights within the paradigm of their own committee agendas. Over the years, honorable members, the forum has positioned itself as a hallmark for human rights advocacy through parliaments, and the consecration of this advocacy exercise are indeed in the model laws developed by yourselves, such as the model law on eradicating child marriage, such as the model law on HIV and AIDS, such as the model law on elections, including the minimum standards for the protection of key populations, which are grounded firmly on regional and international human rights law. Honourable members, in addition, the forum now has an oversight committee which monitors the domestication of model laws developed by the forum and assists in the identification of bottlenecks at both regional and national level. While there is a long way to go to ensure that both civil and political and economic and social rights are fully implemented, there's a scope for progress if all are able and committed. And if partners plan with us, work together with the forum in a strategic manner, we are bound to have parliaments that allow laws to be passed with a human rights component included in it. Distinguished colleagues, honorable members and participants, I accordingly wish to emphasize today the need for collective participation and concerted action for human rights to be implemented by all parties, with one buttressing and shouldering the other. The forum has often propounded that human rights are the concern for all, be it the state as a duty bearer, be citizens as right holders, or civil society organizations and state actors as facilitators for human rights to be properly implemented. Honourable members, today we have within our midst both state and non-state actors, and it is therefore of paramount importance that we work towards establishing closer connections and a symbiosis for the human rights framework at both regional and national level to be advanced. Honourable members, on this note, I wish to emphasize the importance of progressive advocacy in the promotion of human rights. As we know, advocacy is the art of persuading consistently an audience without giving up, not necessarily for immediate results, but for the results that matter at the end of the day. In this respect, parliaments are vested with key advocacy roles, which inherently exist due to their representative mandate. It is for this reason that parliamentarians need to respect all citizenry in their diversity and recognize that rights or human rights are indivisible. Honourable members, discussions under the aegis of Parliament are thus absolutely necessary for ideas and opinions to be escalated at the helm of the state through an entity which has a constitutional mandate to deliberate and speak on behalf of the citizens. It is owing to this continuous advocacy that the forum has been able to adopt its model laws and furthermore, progressively incorporate them with the assistance of civil society organizations, traditional leaders, and independent organizations speaking at arm's length under the auspices of Parliament. And that is why today we have the SADC Lawyers Association, we have Amnesty International, who will assist us in looking at some of these components and speaking truth to power. Distinguished members of Parliament, colleagues and participants, I will not at this stage delve into the very interesting substantive issues which will be addressed during this meeting. I will encourage interaction and motivate partners to speak as a strategy for sustained advocacy on human rights indeed starts at meetings such as this one. As I end, honorable members, I wish to thank you all for attending this landmark meeting. And I wish to make and express mention that this meeting aligns with International Human Rights Day to be celebrated in a few days on the 10th of December. The moment is therefore opportune and timely to discuss on regional cooperation in implementing human rights at the regional level and give the advancements of human rights a fresh start. With these few words, I wish you a pleasant session and wish to thank GIZ for their generous support to the SADC Parliamentary Forum in being able to implement such critical components for the people and the citizens of SADC. I thank you, honorable members, and wish you fruitful deliberation.
Thank you very much, SG, for those incisive words. A lot to pick from the SG's remarks. What stands out is the open invitation for collaboration between civil society, other state actors, with Parliament to collaborate in the protection and the realization of human rights. What also stands out is the how human rights are at the center of the work of SADC Parliamentary Forum and are finding expression through the various model laws that we have made, and also the cross-cutting nature of human rights, meaning that there's opportunity for collaboration, not just in the Standing Committee on Democratization, Governance and Human Rights, but also across the standing committees of SADC Parliamentary Forum. Thank you very much, SG. We appreciate those remarks. I now have the honor of inviting Mr. Mchena to deliver his remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kurasha. I wish to really appreciate the generous offer and invitation by the SADC Parliamentary Forum for us as Amnesty International to partner with you on this particular day, but also partner with you in fulfillment of a spirit of understanding of mutual cooperation that we have developed over the last couple of years. I want to pay tribute to the leadership of the Secretary General Mese Khume for the sterling work that she continues to do with the team at SADC PF over the last few years that we've worked together, and really stand today to say that we are indeed open for this partnership, and we believe in this partnership for years to come. We are meeting at a time, honorable members of the committee responsible for governance, democracy, and human rights at SADC PF. We are meeting at a time when the entire world, indeed our region, is afflicted by the impact of COVID-19. And the impact of COVID-19 has essentially amplified pre-existing fragilities and conditions of our region, in particular, the human rights dimension of our region. And I wish to open this meeting by essentially raising some of the trends that we will be discussing later on, but that constitute the backdrop of this meeting. We know that SADC PF is probably one of the more open institutions across our SADC region. And for that, I think you will continue to find that civil society groups, non-state actors, find you an attractive proposition to discuss global problems and regional phenomena. With this in mind, let's look at our region, especially against the backdrop of COVID-19, which has essentially amplified pre-existing problems. The first issue that I think is important for us to speak from the onset is that our region tends to have a massive contradiction. The first contradiction is that it's a region that is well rich in natural resources, very well resourced, well endowed in natural resources, but terribly poor in human development. Across the region, any of our countries, whether you are in Zambia with its copper, you are in Namibia with its diamonds, even uranium, Mozambique now the largest natural gas frontier on the continent, if not in the world, Zimbabwe with platinum, South Africa with all kinds of mix of industrial minerals, Lesotho with its natural waters, Madagascar with its natural forests. The question we have and we must ask as a group of parliamentarians is, why is it that this region is rich in these natural resources, but terribly deprived in human development? Where are the riches of our region going? Because that deprivation and that contradiction is the biggest attack on human rights that we have to deal with. When you see protests in the street, when you see demonstrations in each country, they are fundamentally driven by economic deprivation. And that is the first issue that I think concerns me. The second contradiction that concerns me is that in this region, we have a growing number of what we are calling middle income countries. In other words, these are countries that have registered a certain degree of gross domestic product relative to their population. But however, a paradox of these middle income countries is the triple burden of unemployment, of poverty and inequality, which again drives the human rights attack in our region. We also have a region that, despite it being generally peaceful, is waging a serious war against women on women's bodies as a result of rising rape and domestic violence. The social violence, social exclusion add to this growing disjuncture between a peaceful region, but a region experiencing wars of all kinds for different people. And they include women, they also include minority groups, including persons with albinism. With that backdrop, Chair, I wish to raise again my appreciation of SADC-PF's role in becoming a legislative norm entrepreneur. The work that you have done in developing model laws on child marriage, on HIV and AIDS, as well as on elections, give us confidence that it is possible, if we take a strong human rights dimension to our analysis of the state of our region, it is possible that the lawmaking function of parliaments across the region could be deployed to start to address this contradiction. It is also possible that if we take the oversight role of parliaments across this region, we could start to make headway in addressing the deficits of development that we have, the deficits of human rights that we have, and the deficit of social protection that we have. If we take the civic intervention, the civic participation role that is facilitated by parliaments, we will see that more and more of parliamentary oversight work across this region will be enhanced through cooperation with civil society groups. So instead of seeing civil society groups as enemies of the state, as they are characterized by some among us, it will be useful to see them as partners that can augment the role that parliament plays in ensuring that there is executive oversight in the manner in which public policy is executed. For us at Amnesty International, working across this region, we see our role as one of reclaiming freedoms, assisting human rights defenders, and ensuring that we shine a spotlight on those that continue to be left on the margins of society, even as we speak about none should be left behind. We see ourselves as those that will move with speed whenever there are violations taking place across our region, amplify that for corrective action to be taken. We see ourselves as enhancing local relevance by working with partners, with communities, with governments, with individual parliaments, with institutions of knowledge production, and with a range of other stakeholders that are committed to ensuring that Southern Africa becomes a rights-respecting region. We see ourselves as the entity, the organization, the group of people that will raise uncomfortable issues. Not so much that we like discomfort, but so much that those that might not be able to speak in our region, in our countries, will probably begin to have a voice. And we believe that parliaments are the best sites for people to be protected. At your last assembly in July last year in Mozambique, SADC Parliamentary Forum adopted what I call a historic motion condemning the attacks on persons with albinism, condemning the killings, and condemning the inaction that we see from individual member states of SADC. That was a revolutionary development because not in many years had we seen something like that. I really believe that in this month, when we celebrate International Human Rights Day, we have a lot more historic motions to adopt, to pass, to discuss, to advance in our region. I think our task is quite covered. It's quite set for ourselves. And I hope that today we will experience a day of interaction, a day of telling each other the truth about our region, but also a day of suggesting things that can be done. I think it is very important when we discuss human rights to not just see it as an issue and an exercise in name calling, but it is also a moment for promotion and for protection in a proactive manner. And I believe that both Amnesty International and SADC Parliamentary Forum are up to the task. And together with our partners, some of whom will be speaking through panels today, we will be experiencing once more a building block that we need to go forward. And I just want to end on this note by thanking once again SADC Parliamentary Forum for agreeing to work with us to ensure that we collectively promote, we collectively defend, and we collectively amplify our human rights that are now, in this moment of COVID, terribly compromised. Thank you very much. And I'll give it back to you, Mr. Kurasha.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mchena, for those very pointed observations. We appreciate the kind words in terms of the work that SADC Parliamentary Forum is doing in promoting the protection and promotion of human rights. After all, for us, it is a mandate that falls on the institutions of parliament. Like Parliamentary Forum, as the Secretary General amplified earlier on. We indeed look forward to, as you said at the end, suggestion of things that work. We look forward to proposals in terms of collaborations that are going to emanate from our meeting. On this note, allow me to invite the Vice Chairperson of the Standing Committee on Democratization, Governance and Human Rights, Honorable Beckman, to deliver the official open address. Over to you, sir.
Chairpersons of SADC PF standing committees, honorable members of the DGHR committee and other SADC Parliamentary Forum standing committees, Ms. Boemo Sekgoma, Secretary General of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, Mr. Diprose Mchena, Director of Amnesty International, Eastern and Southern African Regional Office, Louis Baton-Nye, Chairperson of the Mozambique National Commission on Human Rights, Advocate John Walters of the Ombudsman of Namibia, Muriel Ribeiro, the President of the Independent National Commission on Human Rights of Madagascar, our distinguished panelists and resource persons, the member of the media, distinguished participants, and in absentia, just to recognize that our chairperson, Honorable Geronima Agostino, who has a bereavement, unfortunately. Firstly, I'd like to welcome the honorable members of the Parliamentary Forum, the honorable members of the Standing Committee on Democratization, Governance, Human Rights, representatives of our co-hosts, Amnesty International, the Austrian Development Agency, and the GIZ, members of various civil society organizations, human rights defenders from the SADC region, and all other participants joining us for the virtual meeting. The purpose of this webinar is to deliberate on find solutions for enhancing the role of parliamentarians in the protection and promotion of human rights in the SADC regions through engagements with national and regional human rights states and non-state actors. The protection of human rights of SADC citizens lies at the heart of the work of the SADC Parliamentary Forum. Article 6C of the SADC-PF Constitution stipulates that one of the forum's objectives is to promote the principles of human rights, democracy, peace and security, regional integration, human and social development, economic governance, and gender equality through collective responsibility within the SADC region. The SADC-PF strategic plan for the 2019 to 2023, as the SG identifies, says the respect for human rights as one of the guiding principles of the institution. Indeed, this theme is entrenched across the various thematic areas of our work, including democracy and governance, sexual and reproductive health and rights and HIV/AIDS, trade, natural resource governance, and food and agriculture. To spearhead its work in the promotion and protection of human rights, the SADC-PF established the Democratization, Governance and Human Rights Standing Committee. The committee is a flagship organ reputed as a leading regional championship in this area, working with various states and non-state stakeholders, many of whom are in this meeting today. The DGHR committee, for instance, sponsored the landmark motion condemning attacks, abductions, killings, and discriminations against people with albinism that was mentioned earlier in the SADC region, which was unanimously adopted by the 45th Plenary Assembly session on the 24th of July, 2019 in Mozambique. Honorable members and distinguished participants, SADC-PF's focus on human rights should be viewed in the context that parliaments have a critical role in promoting and protecting people's human rights. Parliamentary mandates as a whole, whether this relates to legislating or adopting the budget or overseeing the executive branch and representing citizens, covers the entire spectrum of political, civil, economic, social, and cultural rights, and thus has an immediate impact on the enjoyment of human rights by the people. Respect for human rights is not only a fundamental value in itself, but also essential to developing stable, democratic, and prosperous societies that are capable of living together in peace. National parliaments represent the basis for good governance, grounded on democratic institutions, responsive to the needs of the people. As the legitimate representatives of the people, parliaments, they have an important role in strengthening democratization, governance, and furthering human development and the welfare for all. Indeed, through approval of ratification of human rights treaties, adopting enabling legislation, and ensuring that sufficient funds are provided for human rights implementation and exercising the oversight function, parliaments can promote and guarantee the enjoyment of human rights by all. Further, parliaments can strengthen their role in promoting and protecting human rights by establishing human rights bodies and following up on recommendations formulated by the United Nations treaty monitoring bodies and special rapporteurs and by other international or regional monitoring bodies. Honorable members and distinguished participants, the SADC Parliamentary Forum recognizes that the most effective way to secure rights and end abuses is for national parliaments and other national and international stakeholders to collaborate in support of human rights. Accordingly, the SADC-PF of the 39th Plenary Assembly session, on the recommendation of the DGHR Standing Committee, adopted broad resolutions that guide us and other stakeholders in promoting and protecting human rights in the SADC region. Among other recommendations, the 39th Plenary Assembly implored national parliaments to establish and strengthen committees such as the mechanism to ensure robust human rights oversight, Committee systems were also identified as a strategic vehicle to enhance collaboration between Parliament and other relevant actors at a national level, including human rights commissions and civil society in tracking human rights issues. The plenary assembly session also called upon the SADC-PF, through its collaboration with one of our co-hosts today, Amnesty International, to train parliamentarians at regional and national levels on human rights issues in order to build their knowledge and skills, as well as research capacity in the role of parliamentarians in the protection, realization, and promotion of human rights. Enjoyment of all human rights by all people can only be guaranteed when parliamentarians, governments, national human rights institutions, civil societies, along with international partners, including those representing regional, continental, and the international human rights systems, are able to work together effectively. Through effective partnerships and engagements with other state and non-state actors to strengthen how they give full effect to the specific powers they have, parliaments can ensure that human rights become a reality for everyone. Honorable members and distinguished participants, it is only through collaboration and partnerships that we can effectively tackle the trend of regression and antagonism that has tended to characterize the human rights narrative in our region. We have, for instance, recently witnessed how the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated human rights challenges in the SADC region. Governments' responses to the pandemic have generally been reactive rather than proactive, thereby triggering several economic, social, civil, and political rights questions. It is evident that we need to work more towards ensuring a more proactive approach to the promotion of human rights henceforth. I have no doubt that if we work towards enhancing public knowledge and awareness of human rights, in particular the actions that constitute violations of rights and the mechanisms for redress in the case of violations, will build a culture of respect for human rights and support stronger accountability in the region. It is therefore imperative that SADC Parliamentary Forum and its partners work to ensure a shift from the traditional approach of reacting to rights abuses to a more proactive approach which buttresses prevention and enforcement mechanisms, empowers citizens, strengthens governance, and sets a basis for accountability. Honorable members and distinguished delegates, it is this regard that I should congratulate the SADC-PF Standing Committee on Democratization, Governance and Human Rights and its partners Amnesty International, the Austrian Development Agency, and the GIZ for convening this important regional webinar towards ensuring stronger collaboration and enhanced parliamentary action in defense of human rights. Our meeting is critical since it is coming just 3 days before this year's International Human Rights Day on the 10th of December. The theme of this year's Human Rights Day is Recover Better, Stand Up for Human Rights. Calls on us to put human rights lenses on as we envisage a post-recovery in our respective countries and a region. Recalling that a year end is on the horizon, it is my fervent hope that we will all emerge from our meeting today more resolute in our quest to ensure a robust collaboration between parliaments, civil society, and other state and non-state actors in promoting and protecting human rights of all the people in all SADC regions. I challenge all of us to embrace a shared vision and recommit to work together effectively towards ensuring that human rights becomes a reality for all in our region in 2021 and beyond. It is now my singular honor to declare the regional webinar officially opened. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Chairperson, for those remarks. I'm sure we all agree, you all agree with me that they set the tone in terms of our deliberations today, in particular, the seizing the opportunities to engage with SADC-PF and in particular the standing committee, to make sure that we have a collaboration towards what the chair termed a more proactive approach rather than a reactive approach, where we see more efforts being put towards education, towards prevention. So I wish to appreciate the call for collaboration, the call for empowered citizens who have adequate knowledge regarding their human rights, who have adequate knowledge regarding the action they must take, the remedy that is available to them in cases where there are violations. On that note, I wish to confer with Mr. Mchena with your opening remarks, speak to your presentation as well regarding the state of human rights in Southern Africa, an analysis of key trends, or there is something that you want to add?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kurasha. I think there is very little to add, especially after the profound introduction. Take it away. So I will share a few additional remarks just to situate the conversation that is now about to follow, because I know that what we're listening.
You muted, Mchena.
Additional comment really relates to trends that everyone in the meeting really needs to pay attention to, and trends that every member of this august committee needs to pay attention to, because they challenge the degree to which the promotional mandate of this committee and the protection mandate of this committee is properly contextualized. If we do not have the facts of our situation, we will not have anything to protect. If we do not have the gaps of our situation, we will have nothing to promote. So it is important that, throughout today, the listening role of Parliament will play a prominent role, but the accompanying role of Amnesty will also play a prominent role in the work of trying to put together a work program going into 2021 that really achieves promotion, protection, and defense of human rights. On the 22nd of October, a tragic development happened in South Africa. In fact, before the 22nd of October, the following words had been ushered by a grandmother from Durban. And she had then said that I refuse to sign. I cannot sell out my people. And if need be, I will die for my people. Tragically, on the 22nd of October, this very woman died. Grandmother Fikile Nchangase her words became the reality of her actual life when she was gunned down in her own home at Opendweni near Mtubatuba on the evening of that particular day at 6:30. 5 men entered the house and shot her 5 times. The reason why she was shot was because she was among a group of people who were refusing to allow some mining activity that was taking place, or that was supposed to take place, for the extraction of coal in an area. This is not anything new in our region. In 2017, 2018, another South African by the name Comrade Sipho Bazuka of the Amadiba community in Xolobeni was also killed in circumstances related to conflict and disputes about mining in the area. We have also seen and heard and recorded threats against the life of Nonhle Mbuthuma, who is one of the leaders in Xolobeni, related again to taking a stance against mining. Across our region, we receive every year as Amnesty International reports of people who are being threatened by state or non-state actors because they are defending the environment. They're defending the environment because the extraction of the environment has sometimes resulted in environmental degradation and damage, as well as attack on livelihoods. This is happening in a year in which the African Union has adopted the theme, silencing the guns. The guns are not silent even in our peaceful region. Since 2017, when the conflict in Cabo Delgado began, over 300,000 people have been displaced, 2,000 people and more have been killed. This again is happening in a context when silencing the guns has been declared. In the period of COVID-19, we saw that from February, about 6 countries in our region adopted state of emergency legal frameworks. Another 6 adopted state of disaster legal frameworks, and 2 adopted a mixed bag of curfews and other legislative measures. These were part of a package designed to enforce lockdowns that would then enable states to contain and disrupt the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Unfortunately, country by country, reports of significant state overreach have been submitted to different human rights organizations, including some who are on this seminar, especially from the state institutions, such as human rights commissions. Because we have seen, unfortunately, loss of life, we have seen excessive use of the force by police services. We've also seen a complete departure from international human rights legal norms, which require enforcement of any regulation that is enforced during state of emergencies to still follow the principles of legality, of necessity, of proportionality, and of accountability. This has been a real challenging year for our region because silencing the guns have not taken effect. So it is a trend that we can discuss in the course of the day. The second trend that we continue to see is a corresponding attack on socio-economic rights, in particular livelihoods. We saw with COVID-19 that the blanket lockdown measures that were adopted from countries that started to initiate responses to COVID-19 in Europe, North America, and China were taken hook, line, and sinker into our countries. And when we lock down an economy that is largely informalized, there is evidently an attack on livelihoods. There was also an attack on health services because our health infrastructure was not prepared, even if we are talking about very low numbers for our region. Social protection measures became inadequate and marginalized groups were even further marginalized. Supporting human rights defenders who were now challenging state policy became a big issue. So we see a trend across our region as a result of deprivation, of an attack on socio-economic rights. I think it is important that members of this committee at the end of this year are able to produce a real substantive finding on what has happened to our socio-economic rights. We know that across this continent, investing in public health has been a problem. And I'll give you an example of a country outside of this region. At the time of COVID-19 arriving in South Sudan, which we know is afflicted by the war, the country had 5 vice presidents, but it had 4 ventilators. So if the crisis had really hit, it would have been very difficult to decide who among the 5 will not be able to access ventilators. We see in this region an absence of diagnostics, an absence of vaccines, and an absence of therapeutics enough to combat and contain a virus if it were to attack us in this second wave that we're talking about. That trend of attack on socio-economic rights is very visible and in part corresponds to what I raised earlier, that the country somehow is unable to direct the proceeds of its own economic growth into human development, so remains with a contradiction. We have seen a trend also of a failure in this region for international cooperation in order to combat what clearly is a human rights emergence. What we see are nationalistic responses, very inward-looking countries deciding to deal with the virus in a manner that seems to suggest that you can contain it within borders. So the COVID-19 trend has been one trend that essentially shaped our human rights landscape in the last 10 months to 12 months. Away from COVID, I think we've also seen a rising number of violations affecting women across our region. It's not just violence against women, it's also daily social violence and deprivation, that the conception that sustainable development goals would be implemented in each of our countries in ways that leaves no one behind has really been a fallacy in a number of our countries. Because apart from the fact that 90% of all sustainable development goals relate to human rights mandates, we have not seen leadership investing in the area of ensuring that violence against women really is decisively dealt with. So every country is experiencing either death, rape, or social violence. It was not therefore uncommon that recently in Namibia, we had a huge protest led by young people called #ShutItAll, which was essentially an invitation for the state and other actors to deal decisively with the question of deprivation and attack against women that we see in our region. Not only violence in the form of physical violence, but we've also seen the rise of cases in a number of our countries of the problem of obstetric fistula that is driven by, among other things, child marriages, but also poverty, education, deprivation. We've seen an attack on the provision of sexual and reproductive health services, which has affected ability of women to access antenatal care, postnatal care, especially in conditions of restrictions. This trend has been a problem. Another trend that we have seen across the region is the retention of a legal and institutional framework, which still relies on colonial era legislation. There are a number of our countries that retain, for law and order purposes, colonial era legislation that continue to inhibit the progress of our region into a just, viable, and rights-respecting region. It is, I think, important for our parliaments to really start to look at their legal frameworks, to really look at their penal codes, to look at the laws that exist, to see how many of these have continued to be deployed in a post-colonial setting, but using colonial era legislative instruments. Our region continues to be doing well at the level of norms. So our norms are good, but the implementation is a challenge. We still have, this call that says you can't have constitutions without constitutionalism. You can't have democracy without democrats. So moving from norms into implementation is a big challenge for our region. Two more trends that we are seeing, which we need to deal with, is the emergence of restrictions online, where there seems to be a fascination and obsession with member states to regulate the internet space, to regulate social media, to criminalize expression, to criminalize freedoms that people might be enjoying on social media. In a number of our countries, we have seen people who have been arraigned before courts, either for insulting a president or public officials or judges. I think it is important that one of the primary responsibilities of a parliament is to defend civic space. The civic space that exists in the region through freedom of expression, assembly, movement, and association is so vital even to the imagination of our societies as they think of ways of growing economically. It is in this 2020 year frightening to see that there are some states that are still very committed to containing and rolling back on these freedoms that have become so obvious. There is a corresponding relationship between a free and creative society and a developing society. Once you limit freedoms online and offline, the rest is that you are forcing expression to go underground. When it comes out in a less palatable manner. So with these trends that constitute the discussion that probably is going to take place today, what should we classify, what should we be recommending as the role for Parliament? And as I indicated in my opening remarks, the first one is the lawmaking role. We need to really ask the question, are parliaments in Southern Africa making laws? Are laws being passed by Parliament, or laws are passing through parliaments? When an executive is really committed to passing a particular piece of law, are we seeing decisive action in seeking the input of civics to ensure that you try and make the legal framework representative of the aspiration, not just of the ruling elite, but also of the broader society? I think it might be necessary to look back at the last 10 months and review some of the regulations, some of the laws, some of the policies that have been put in place in the name of fighting a pandemic, which have tended, in fact, to be pieces of law and regulations that have limited freedoms of expression and incidentally started to fight ordinary citizens. In the public policy role of this parliament, of this parliamentary committee, as it seeks to execute its mandate of overseeing public policy with respect to governance, democracy, and human rights, a concerning issue in the last 10 months has been the rising debt burden in Southern Africa, but also across the rest of the continent, which has created limited fiscal space for governments to deploy resources to respond to the pandemic, but to also advance human rights. I think it is almost now more than 25 countries in Africa have now exceeded what is set by the IMF as an acceptable debt to GDP ratio, which essentially means that more and more of our countries are paying more in interest over the debts they've accumulated than in money which is available to deploy to education, to health, and to water. And in the absence of a decisive debt audit across Southern Africa, which is primary for releasing resources that are needed to invest in human rights, we might be having severe problems of progress in this region. So the public policy oversight role of Parliament should be promoted, because by ensuring that resources are contained and deployed into a human rights mandate, you are freeing society from the tensions that exist between states and we're seeing less and less of a vibrant relationship between Parliament and civil society on the topical governance issues of the day. You might find a lot of conversations and relationship in issues we might consider softer, but it is for parliaments to open up the door, even when we deal with hardcore issues of democracy, of governance, of speaking truth to power, in order for us to have really competitive societies that can be counted upon by our region as societies that can take us forward. None but ourselves definitely can free our minds, and unless our own parliaments stand up to ensure that the common conversation and vocabulary of human rights defenders, the conversation of shrinking space, the conversation of enabling vibrant, tolerant democracies to take place. If we don't do that as our parliaments, who else can do that for us? We cannot wait for someone else to come from outside to tell us to talk to one another. So I hope that today we will hear from the various panels poignant conversations about some of these trends and some of these themes. And I will be here to make sure that we continue to raise this conversation. Thank you very much, Mr. Kurasha.
Yeah, what shall I say? Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for that incisive presentation on the trends in terms of human rights, of the key trends in terms of human rights in the SADC region. It really helps us to set the tone in terms of the various thematic areas that are going to be discussed by the various panels. We are doing well in terms of time, and we're supposed to break for tea at 11:15. Is it okay if we took a break now and reconvene at 10 to 11, or we proceed? Mr. Mchena talked about being open even to deal with the hard issues of democracy, and as a Democrat, I would wish to hear from the chairperson whether he thinks it's too early to take a break, or we can take a break and reconvene at 10 to.
Chair, I think in the interest of the program, if it's not going to interrupt the program, if we carry on in terms of going into a discussion, then let's have the break.
Indeed, we have recovered a lot of time. We should be well within time if we reconvene at 10 to 11. So on that note, let's take a short break, a health break, save our backs, save our eyes, and enjoy the coffee. Thank you very much. Welcome back, everybody. We shall now resume, and we're going to go into the first session. This session will have Luis Beton-Naye, the chairperson of the Mozambique National Commission on Human Rights. We'll have Advocate John Waters, the Ombudsman of Namibia, and thirdly, Mireille Benoro, from the president of the Independent National Commission on Human Rights, Madagascar. As we start the session, and the session is going to focus on national human rights institutions and parliament perspectives on participation and engagement. I have the privilege of chairing or moderating this session. Before I go into the specific questions that I want to pose to our panelists, I want to refer to a few quotations. First quotation is one I took from one of the landmark rulings by the Constitutional Court of South Africa in a case of State versus Makwanyane in another 1995. Those who have followed the constitutional developments in South Africa will know that this is the case that barred capital punishment, death sentence, in other words. The specific quotation and why I'm quoting it is the Constitutional Court makes it clear that the notion of human rights is not a Western notion. It is a notion that is embedded in the African concept or philosophy of Ubuntu. And I wish to quote, an outstanding feature of Ubuntu in a community sense is the value it puts on human life and human dignity. Respect for the dignity of every person is an integral to this concept. During violent conflicts and times when violent crime is rife, the stout members of society decry the loss of Ubuntu. Thus, heinous crimes are the antithesis of Ubuntu. Treatment that is cruel, inhuman, or degrading, the rift of Ubuntu. The concept of Ubuntu is a concept that permeates the Constitution generally, and more particularly, Chapter 3, which embodies the entrenched fundamental human rights. The concept carries in it the ideas of humanness, social justice, and fairness. The second aspect I want to allude to as we go into the role of Parliament in the promotion and protection of human rights is the notion that almost all the constitutions of SADC member states have a provision mandating parliaments to ensure the protection and promotion of the Constitution. And this Constitution also embeds the Bill of Rights. Lastly is a quotation from the Commonwealth Secretariat, which resonates very much with part of the excerpts that came from the chairperson's speech. It is well known that parliaments have a special role in the promotion and protection of human rights, a responsibility which they share with the executive and the judiciary. In spite of this shared responsibility in the arena of human rights, and owing to its primary role in lawmaking, Parliament is the branch of government best placed to give effect to human rights and take practical measures to prevent abuses and to ensure that law provides practical means through which remedies may be sought for alleged violations. To this end, parliamentarians may influence policies and budgets at national level, monitor policy implementation programs, local levels, address the needs and concerns of their constituencies, and act as a catalyst in the realization of human rights domestically and internationally. Without further ado, I wish to invite our panelists to the floor. And I already indicated who the panelists are. We're going to specifically focus on the role of Parliament in the promotion and protection of human rights. In particular, we wish to our panelists to share their perspectives, their experiences from their respective parliaments working for national human rights institutions, what their experience has been in terms of one, the role being played by Parliament in your own countries, in terms of your own country experiences, and maybe across the region in the protection and promotion of human rights. We also want to hear how you have worked with Parliament, the key success factors, any challenges, what could be done to improve some of those challenges that are existing. And thirdly, we also want to hear about your overall experience in terms of the collaboration with national parliaments, again linked to the above in terms of what could be done to address any of the challenges that existing in engaging parliaments to play an active role in the promotion and protection of human rights. We also want to hear from you in terms of the role of your understanding of the role of the Standing Committee and what you think it could do to facilitate and strengthen at regional level, the role of parliaments in the promotion and the protection of human rights. In that regard, I wish to invite our first panelist, Luis Bitton-Nahe, the chairperson of the Mozambique National Commission on Human Rights, to give a response. I will, where necessary, come in with follow-up questions. Noted, Mr. Mukumbo Mutali is standing on behalf of Mr. Abiba Osman, who is still in a meeting with the president. Mr. Mutali is Director of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Okay, welcome, Mr. Mutali. I had missed that. So you are also going to be part of our panelists. So our panelists will have 4 people. Mr. Mutali representing Mr. Abiba. It will have Mr. Lewis, Advocate Waters, and Mereila. So let me start with, while allowing Tali to prepare a bit, I will invite Mr. Nahe to take the floor and respond to the questions. Where necessary, I will make follow-up questions. So I will give you 5 to 7 minutes to respond to the questions. Over to you. Mr. Nahe? Mr. Nahe, are you in the meeting? Yes. Yes, go ahead. Hello? Hello? Mr. Nahe, can you hear me? It looks like we have a bit of a challenge with Mr. Nahe. Maybe while we are waiting for Mr. Nahe to come on board, Mtali, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Did you get the questions?
Yeah, I think you can just quickly go through the questions so that I know that we're on the same page.
So in other words, this session is focusing on the collaboration between parliaments and the national human rights institutions, in particular, focusing, leveraging on the mandate of parliament in terms of its lawmaking, its oversight role, its role in appropriating resources for purposes of protection and promotion of human rights. So we wanted to find out from you in terms of your own country experience, what are some of the main reflections on the role of national parliaments in terms of their mandate in executing this mandate? We also want to hear from you in terms of whether you actually have worked in with parliaments. Is there a program between parliaments and your parliament and your national human rights institution? Has this been ad hoc or it's systematic? What are the critical success factors? What are some of the challenges that you have experienced? We also want to hear about what you think the SADC Parliamentary Forum, in particular the Standing Committee on Democratization, Governance and Human Rights, can do at regional level to enhance collaboration between parliaments and national human rights institutions. In other words, we really want to put on the spot the mandate of parliament, how we can leverage on it, what has been working, what more can we do to enhance this relationship, collaboration, to make sure that human rights are mainstreamed in terms of the relationship parliament and national human rights institutions. So you have 7 minutes within which to tackle the questions. If need be, I will have follow-up questions.
Thank you so much. As I earlier indicated, my name is Mr. Makumba Muntali. I'm the Director of Economic, Social, Cultural Rights for Malawi Human Rights Commission. I'm standing in for Ms. Habiba Osman, who is currently in a meeting with the President. There is a task force that the President has actually formulated, the rising cases of gender-based violence, and Malawi Human Rights Commission is a part of that task force. So that's why she's not here. Okay, so looking at in terms of the role of national parliament in protecting human rights, as you are aware, Malawi follows the dualist legal approach to domestication of international human rights instruments. This means that if there is an instrument that Malawi has actually ratified, it does not automatically become part of the law. There is need to have an act of parliament. Up with specific legislations to domesticate human rights instruments becomes critical. So from our reflections, we have seen that it has been mostly a mixed bag. Parliament has been progressive, for example, in coming up with legislations that domesticate some provisions of international human rights instruments like CEDAW, ICCPR, economic social cultural rights. For example, we have the Gender Equality Act that the Parliament played a critical role, the Trafficking in Persons Act, and then several legislations, access to information and others that we saw the Malawi Parliament being so progressive in terms of coming up with these legislations. And when you look at the content of these legislations, you find that they are partially domesticating some of the provisions that are in the CEDAW and other international and regional instruments. But at the very same time, we have also seen Parliament actually being retrogressive in terms of rejecting some of the bills that we feel would have enhanced the promotion, for example, of civil and political rights. In 2017, there was a special law commission that was instituted to review the various laws around the electoral reforms. And they came up with a number of bills that included, for example, bringing on board gender quotas to ensure that there is a fair representation of women. But when the bill was tabled in Parliament, Parliament rejected such reforms. So that was actually another area that from my experiences, we have seen that I think Parliament, especially when it comes to bills that seems to promote human rights, I think it may be an issue around maybe not having much knowledge in the area and understanding the importance of such bills that have tended to reject those bills. And then we have also seen that, as you know, Parliament has got different roles. There is the oversight, lawmaking, we're talking about representation, but I think we feel like Malawi Parliament hasn't fully utilized its oversight role, especially in terms of holding the executive arm of government to account on specific outstanding human rights violations, which the Malawi Human Rights Commission had pursued or had actually submitted to it in its reports for action in terms of holding government accountable. There are some extrajudicial killings that happened previously that have not been acted on until today, despite the Malawi Human Rights Commission in its report submitting to Parliament as well as the executive arm of government for the action. So we feel like Parliament hasn't really been providing that oversight role. In terms of how well we have worked with Parliament in delivering our mandate as a national human rights institution, I think there have been several ways in how Malawi Human Rights Commission has worked with Parliament. We have engaged Parliament through the Speaker of Parliament, as well as the Legal Affairs Committee of Parliament, through our submission of annual human rights reports. As you are aware, according to the Human Rights Act, as well as the Constitution of Malawi, the National Human Rights Commission is supposed to submit annual human rights report to Parliament. And there have also been times whereby Malawi Human Rights Commission has been summoned by the Legal Affairs Committee of Parliament to provide clarity on some aspects of the annual human rights report. And then we have also engaged with Parliamentary Committee on Media pertaining to the access to information legislation. As you're aware, the Malawi Human Rights Commission has in the past few years been given an added responsibility to provide oversight on the implementation of the Access to Information Act. So we have had some engagement with the Parliamentary Committee on Media in terms of around the access to information legislation oversight. There have also been issues around the how we have engaged Parliament on HIV/AIDS bill previously, as well as also the trafficking in persons. Looking at the success factors in terms of our cooperation with Parliament, I think we would say that the one of the dominant success factors is the submission of reports to Parliament, that we have consistently submitted those reports to Parliament, and what we have basically seen is that our reports have become actually a critical part in terms of providing a clear picture in terms of the human rights situation to Parliament. Then secondly, I would say Parliament, apart from enacting the Human Rights Commission Act, which actually guides our operations, it continues to assign the Malawi Human Rights Commission specific mandates as it enacts new legislations. So we have observed this trend that I think when there are specific legislations that are coming in, we see Parliament having trust in Malawi Human Rights Commission to be able to provide oversight. Like currently, the Gender Equality Act, as well as the Access to Information Act, all these two legislations have been, the Malawi Human Rights Commission is providing oversight on these two legislations. So that to us, I think it shows the trust that Parliament has on the Malawi Human Rights Commission. And at the very same time, also we have also, when we look at the barriers that we see in terms of our cooperation with Parliament, we see that currently there is no specific human rights committee in Parliament. So as I earlier indicated, our engagement basically is through the Office of the Speaker and then through the Legal Affairs Committee. So the implications of that is because there is no human rights committee in Parliament, there isn't the Parliament is deprived of an opportunity of a certain committee to be able to scrutinize the various legislations that are coming into Parliament to see if they if from a human rights perspective, they're able to cut all issues from that from that angle. So. And then we have also seen that some of the reports that we have been submitting to Parliament, there is no action in terms of them being deliberated in the whole assembly, the national parliament. As I said, we submit through the committee, through the speaker and then the Legal Affairs Committee, with the expectation that these issues will not just end at a committee level, but they will also be discussed in the whole national assembly. So that doesn't really happen. What do we see the role of SADC PF Standing Committee on Democratization within the context of its human rights work and mandate? I think one of our expectations is also trying maybe to bring together national human rights institutions, maybe to share best practices. I think with the particular focus on the issue around the supporting, for example, like supporting us in terms of lobbying to Parliament, to national parliaments on how they can establish the human rights committees in our parliaments. And then we also observe that the SADC PF Standing Committee seems to focus much on elections and other general governance issues in particular country. However, the focus on human rights issues that are affecting people in SADC tends to be limited. So we think maybe if there could be such a more priority towards those human rights issues would also help us a lot. So I think in a nutshell, I think that's what I would say. That's how Malawi Human Rights Commission has engaged with the national parliament. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mtali, for that very informative presentation. At this juncture, I would defer asking any questions to the plenary. And as such, I will move to the next presenter. I want to find out if Mr. Nahe is ready now. Mr. Nahe, are you ready? May I therefore propose that we move to Advocate Waters while we wait for feedback from Mozambique. Advocate Waters, you take the floor, speak to the similar issues in terms of the Namibian experience.
Good morning to everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Advocate. How are you?
I am very well. Thank you also for the invitation to participate in this webinar. But let I start immediately off, just to give a very two-sentence who or what the Ombudsman in Namibia is. The Ombudsman institution is a constitutional office. It is a very broad mandate. You can still hear me? Oh.
Very well.
You're very well. As a very broad mandate, and one of the mandate is to receive and investigate complaints of human rights violations. The other three are typical ombudsman mandates. So that makes the Ombudsman institution of Namibia the Human Rights Commission in Namibia. Namibia does not have a separate Human Rights Commission for obvious reasons. But moving now to the discussion, there is nowhere, not even the Paris Principles, spells out in detail or define the relationship between national human rights and parliaments. There wasn't not an attempt. There are such guidelines. That is the Abuja guidelines and the Belgrade principles, but they are not implemented so much. The relationship between the Ombudsman of Namibia and its parliament is ad hoc. There is no formal MOU which regulate the relationship between us. But having said that, on the reflections of the role of Namibian National Assembly played in protection of human rights, I can just briefly refer to that the legislative power of Namibia is vested in the National Assembly. And in the execution of its duty in promoting and protecting human rights, the National Assembly has passed a number of laws aimed at promoting and protecting human rights and preventing human rights. The Namibia follows the monist approach, and economic, social, and cultural rights are not expressly guaranteed on our constitution. But the acts which National Assembly has passed during the number of years is firstly the Ombudsman Act, the Combating of Rape Act, Combating of Domestic Violence Act, Prohibition of Racial Discrimination Act, Marriage Equality Act, Trafficking in Persons Act, Child Care and Protection Act, and the Witness Protection Act. These are some of the legislation passed through our parliament. There's no need to domesticate the international and regional human rights institute, which Namibia is party to and has ratified. How well do we work, the Ombudsman work with Parliament? As I said, there's no formal relationship, and the working relationship is ad hoc. But the Ombudsman is regularly invited by standing committees to brief them on the role and activities of the Ombudsman relating to his human rights mandate, international human rights mandates ratified by Namibia, as well as challenges faced by the Ombudsman. The National Assembly and National Council involve the Ombudsman in the legislative process, for example, to give evidence and advice on the constitutionality of certain clauses in bills. Members of Parliament, and that is of political parties, regularly submit complaints to the Ombudsman for investigation. In part fulfillment of his duty to advise members of the National Assembly, the Ombudsman developed and printed a compendium of international human rights law for parliamentarians, and containing all the instruments ratified by Namibia and the concluding and recommendations of the treaty bodies. Very recently, the National Assembly in September 2020 refers a special report of the Ombudsman to the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, who must now examine, consider the report and make recommendations to the National Assembly. The Ombudsman is regularly invited by the Speaker of the National Assembly to participate in the induction course of new members of Parliament. This year, unfortunately, the induction course could not happen because of the virus, and my topic, which I was given to share with the members, new members, was the Constitution and human rights. The most important form of cooperation between the National Assembly and the Ombudsman is first, on the one hand, the duty of the Ombudsman to report to the National Assembly through its annual report, and on the other hand, the duty of the National Assembly to receive, consider, and debate the report, and then represents a government's response in the National Assembly. That is the accountability provision. The Parliamentary Committee on Constitutional and Legal Affairs has the responsibility of overseeing and supporting the work of the Ombudsman. Very briefly, the standing rules and orders provides, with regard to the Ombudsman, the committee may, and I emphasize the word may, immediately it gives a discretion to this committee whether to consider or not. May inter alia examine, consider, and report on the annual reports of the Ombudsman, satisfy itself that the Ombudsman has been carrying out its constitutional mandate in an effective and efficient manner, and ensure that investigations are not jeopardized because of a lack of resources. The Standing Committee should not have a discretion. It must be a mandatory duty to examine, consider the report of the Ombudsman. It is for this reason, this discretion which the particular committee has, that it did not examine and consider and debate the Ombudsman reports for the past 16 years. I was never called before the Standing Committee to account for the resources, public resources, which I used in the exercise of my duties. There's not even much to say about the success factor. By holding the Ombudsman accountable, by considering and debating this report, will lead to closer and more effective cooperation. The annual report of the Ombudsman, like any other national human rights institution, details every aspect of the Ombudsman's work during the past year. The successes, failures, frustrations, and recommendations which the Ombudsman made, but which remain unimplemented because there's no discussion, debate on the Ombudsman's report. It stands to reason that the performances of my office can only be gauged by those who read my reports. How can participation, engagement, and between national human rights institutions be strengthened across the region? Engagement and collaboration between individual institutions are ad hoc. Our collective engagement and collaboration are through our regional body, NANRE. the network of African national human rights institutions. Strengthening resources will result in continuous strengthening the cooperation between national human rights institutions. What do I see as the role of this SADC Standing Committee? My suggestion is simple. This Standing Committee must ensure that its recommendations, which are commendable, do not become paper dreams or paper tigers with no hope of implementation. And I like, and I heard what DPROS has said, that moving from norms to implementation, and that is will be my message to the Standing Committee and the forum, that we move from norms to implementation. Ladies and gentlemen, that is very briefly what I can tell you what's happening in Namibia on the relationship or the collaboration between the Ombudsman and the National Assembly. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Advocate, for sharing that very interesting and very informative experience of the Ombudsman's office and the Parliament of Namibia, comprising the two houses, the National Assembly and the National Council. I'll come back to you through the plenary in terms of follow-up questions. Let me invite Mireille to take the floor and share with us the experience of Madagascar. Over to you, Mireille.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for giving me the floor, inviting me to this very exciting panel on the role of national parliaments in the protection of human rights. According to the law that institutes the National Human Rights Commission of Madagascar, it is to Parliament that it is bound to present its annual reports. This was duly done in the 4 years since the inception of the Commission in 2017. Relations have been cordial, both at an institutional and a personal level. For example, a senator approached me earlier this year requesting the National Human Rights Commission's support to a proposed law on nationality and gradual elimination of statelessness. On behalf of the Commission, I wrote a memorandum on the implications of statelessness in terms of human rights, particularly the right of children to an identity, according to the Convention of Children's Rights, which Madagascar ratified in 1991. The memorandum caused the proposed law to be discussed in the legal committee of the Senate. However, it has not gone any further due to political conflict between the Senate and the executive authorities. The majority of the senators belong to the opposition, and the government has made drastic cuts into its budget and reduced the number of senators from 90 to 18. As a result, the senators are more or less on strike. I will now briefly present some of the challenges facing Parliament in playing its full role in democracy and governance, the basis of the protection of human rights. In the other house, the National Assembly, the large majority of the 170 members belong to the party of the President of the Republic. They feel powerful because the institution is entitled to lodge a motion of censure against the government, but unfortunately, they use that power mainly to demand privileges for themselves. Laws as important as the laws of finance are voted hurriedly and almost unanimously, excepting the few opposition members. Only last week, the law of finance for 2021 was voted almost without discussion, although some items were questionable. For example, the budget of the Ministry of Sports has been increased almost 3 times from what it was last year, mainly for the construction of stadiums, whereas the budget of the Ministry of Health was reduced despite the impact of COVID-19 and of the drought, which is causing famine, malnutrition, and death in the southern regions of the country. The priorities of the government may be questionable, but the majority of the members of parliament who belong to the president's party are not supposed to question them. Another striking illustration of the political weakness of parliament happened last August when 80 detainees broke from the prison in Farafangana. The police made disproportionate use of force, shooting the escaped prisoners who threw stones at them, killing 20 of them. The member of parliament for the district, who belongs to the president's party, at first denounced the violation of human rights, but soon was silenced, with her staff explaining that she had been misled by false reports. Political conformity must prevail over objectiveness in the face of human rights violations. One more area for reinforcement of human rights culture is illustrated by the fact that after each report by the Human Rights Commission before the Parliament, in the last 4 years, both at the Senate and the National Assembly, the Commission has been regularly criticized for incomprehensibly defending criminals who have made the people suffer cruel losses, both of lives and property. This was invariably because the Commission had denounced either mob lynching or mysterious deaths in police premises, which makes it impossible to bring anyone to justice and punish the real perpetrators. So those are some of the challenges, examples of the challenges in improving the role of Parliament in the promotion and protection of human rights in Madagascar, for which regional cooperation would be key. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for a very informative presentation. It's really appreciated. While we are locked down, you took me back to Malagasy and through the details you have shared in the presentation. It's greatly appreciated. I will reserve the question time to when we open for the plenary. Let me, at this juncture, check if Nae is now online and is able to make a presentation. Louis Biton Nae, the chairperson of the Mozambique National Commission on Human Rights, wish to confirm if you're online. May I check with my colleague Tigere? Are you able to confirm whether Naya is in the meeting?
I'm Sakurasha. I'm not able to confirm as yet. We got confirmation that he would be available, but we have not seen a specific name on the participants. So I think what I can do is just to reach his office, but maybe let's proceed for now while I'm trying to do that to confirm.
Okay, sure. Thanks very much. I think let's proceed. Honorable members, distinguished participants, we have listened to very interesting, very incisive, very pointed situations obtaining in Malawi, Namibia, Madagascar in terms of the mandate of Parliament, how the relationship between the Parliament and the National Human Rights Institution is panned out. In some cases systematic, but in some cases very ad hoc. The extent to which the legal framework clearly mandates Parliament to play a role in the protection and promotion of human rights, and the way in which in some cases this mandate is discretionary. At this point, I think I want to open up for any questions to our panelists. I will allow for 15 minutes. In fact, for 20 minutes. So we have until 12 o'clock to pose any questions. Those who want to pose questions, kindly show by raising your hands through the raising hands function. And I see the chairperson, the vice chairperson, Honorable Beckman. In fact, I'd omitted to also highlight the fact that there were very pointed suggestions or challenges put on the committee, on SADC-PF, and through it the committee by the human rights institutions in terms of what we could do as a committee. You may also wish to, committee members may also wish to speak that. Honorable members from other SADC-PF committees who are in the meeting, please feel free to also come in and join the discussion. Let me give the opportunity to Honorable Beckman.
Chair, thanks very much. And I was going to echo that sentiment that people must, from the other committees, please feel free to come in and ask those questions and participate. I think one of the challenges are, and we've mentioned them before, is that when the human rights take place in other countries, and they are our neighbors, the problem is interfering in another country is problematic, especially in the southern regions where we've had a loyalty to each other. You know, there's a sense that that interference is unwelcome. And what would the punishments be? Because obviously sanctions is not viable. If if we don't like sanctions from places like the Western countries, why would we want sanctions from our own neighbors? So what are the types of sanctions that we should be looking at that are good enough as a country as a neighbor next door? What would be the ideas that some of our experts on the panel have that we should be using? You know, when we talk about human rights abuses, and something I was going to get to at the end, something like the free trade agreement has actually got human rights, there's beacons of concern in these free trade agreements that there could be human rights abuses. Because if a country gains, there must mean that there's a country that loses. And in a country that loses, there must be certain, there must be a gender inequality, or there must be a human rights issue that's going to appear. And these are the kind of things that we as a committee, when we roll out the model law, I think there's also something that we need to work on, because I'm also taking very seriously the sentiment that we've got to roll out action and not just it mustn't just be activity, it's got to be productivity. So I'm interested to hear that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Beckman. Are there any further questions? I don't seem to see anyone wanting to take the floor, at least through the raising of hands function. Maybe before I hand over to our panelists to respond, what I wanted to also find out from the panelists representing the national human rights institutions is one of the instruments through which, in the context of the deliberative and consultative powers that SADC Parliamentary Forum currently have as a parliamentary body, is through the model laws as a persuasive tool to facilitate domestication of international instruments, visions of international instruments into national legislation. To what extent have you, through your parliaments, interfaced with, or any other mechanism, interfaced with the model laws that SADC-PF has been making? We have mentioned the model law on HIV and AIDS, the model law on eradicating child marriages and protecting those already in marriage, the model law on elections. Have you found this to be viable instruments? Have they created adequate opportunities for you to entrench the protection and promotion of human rights, seeing that these instruments actually contain a lot of the human rights that are prevalent in our region? I see Honorable Tsepang Masena with a hand up. I'll give her the opportunity to ask a question or questions. After that, I'll hand over to our panelists to respond. Over to you, Honorable Masena.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity and the presentations that we've had since morning. I really took my time to raise a hand because it's not necessarily a question per se. It's just an element of appreciation because I think I've just learned of various ways in which our government, through our parliaments, can take heed into the human rights issue. But I'm particularly fascinated by the Namibian presentation, which alludes to Parliament being forced to take into consideration the submission of the Ombudsman report. Because in Lesotho, I remember in our last session, there was a report of the human rights, of the Ombudsman submitted, but it really was just another submission and it wasn't even debated. So I'm particularly excited by this notion, and I think it's a very insightful content for us to consider. Thank you so much. So there was no question really. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Masena, for that pointed intervention. We appreciate you reaching us from the kingdom in the sky. At this juncture, I wish to invite the panelists to respond to the questions. In no particular order, those who want to respond to any of the questions, since they were quite general, please feel free to speak and respond. Advocate Waters, do you have anything to say?
Thank you. The question about model laws, it's a good practice. And again, let me align myself to Honorable that Each country has to decide what is best for her. And if it is these kinds of model laws are enforced on individual countries, it may be perceived as interference and not be acted upon. I again want to emphasize that it is a good practice. I cannot see, I did not see that Namibia followed or tried to enact or try to make use of the model laws. We are still struggling to get a law prohibiting child marriage, in spite of the fact that there is a model law. The same what I want to say about what the honorable member of the chairperson of the committee said is that you cannot set too much, and that is why in all recommendations, in all conventions, in all statements, you always use these diplomatic language. We call upon, we advise, and that call upon remain, as far as I am concerned, remains call upon. And it stands to reason you cannot, as said, make or attach sanction if a member country do not follow this advice. Unfortunately, and that is why I call them paper tigers, it is impossible to implement because there's no political will from our countries. You can recall, and my colleagues in the commissions can recall how many unanswered recommendations from the treaty bodies are still with us. And year after year or cycle after cycle, the committee have the committees have to ask us, what did you do with the recommendation of the ombudsman in regard to that and that? And then the recommendation is sent to the ombudsman, please answer it. So I think that we should be, there should be a pressure on member countries and really to show that commitment to human rights by effectively cooperate with the ombudsman and see that those little things which can make difference in our citizens' lives, that is the right to water, to sanitation, to adequate health, housing, should become real realities in our countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Advocate Waters. Your intervention reminds me of what the Secretary General alluded to earlier on in her opening remarks, talked about progressing advocacy, where we keep pushing without tiring in terms of demanding accountability and leadership with regards to issues of human rights from our political leadership. Mr. Mutali, you have any interventions or any responses?
Thank you so much. I think in terms of answering the question, to what extent have we interacted with the SADC-BF model laws in advancing various bills through Parliament? I may not have the straight question because I've just joined the Malawi Human Rights Commission very recently. Maybe I'm just a week old. I was in the civil society. That's where I've engaged with Amnesty International and others. However, what I can say is looking at the legal framework that informs the work that mandates the Malawi Human Rights Commission. For example, when you look at Section 14 of the Human Rights Commission Act, you find that it does provide that opportunity for the Commission to be able to promote the harmonization of national legislation with practices at international level, with international standards, even regional standards. So, for example, it reads to promote the harmonization of national legislations and practices with international human rights instruments, which Malawi is party to, and to promote and monitor the effective implementation. So, when you look at that that provision, it does provide an opportunity where the model laws can be used also in trying to when the Commission is engaging Parliament around specific legislation. And the other provision, basically within the Human Rights Commission Act, it talks about giving the mandate to Malawi Human Rights Commission to recommend the adoption of new legislations or administrative provisions, or even repeal, replace, or amend certain legislations, and also examining specific legislations in accordance with the international standards. So what I can say in summary is there is a window for Malawi Human Rights Commission actually to be able to use the SADC model laws in order to advance specific bills that can promote human rights. So, but then I'll still come back to you in terms of to what extent have we used the SADC PF models. Definitely there might be a possibility that we may have done that, particularly looking at the HIV and AIDS bill, which the Malawi Human Rights Commission played a very central role in lobbying Parliament actually to pass it. So I'll check with colleagues, and I think I should be able to come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mpali, for that response. It's appreciated. I do know that the SADC model law on eradicating child marriages was also widely used in Malawi, in particular in Parliament when there was a bill related to issues of child marriages. I'm sure when you do further research, you stumble upon this information. What it also points to is the potential that exists in terms of the collaboration between SADC Parliamentary Forum and the national human rights institutions in the work that SADC PF has in promoting and protecting human rights, including through the model laws. So we need to make sure that we leverage on this opportunity going forward. I wish to invite Madame Marele to respond.
Okay, thank you. What I would like to discuss maybe is about the collaboration between national parliament and the parliamentary SADC Parliamentary Forum. It seems to me that the link is really very very frail. I have not seen much intervention of the forum, of the SADC Parliamentary Forum in the activity of the National Parliament of Madagascar, except for a very much appreciated intervention in the 2018 election, presidential election, when SADC really played a very vital part in ensuring that the election was fair. But to recall what Diprosi Muchena said at the beginning of this meeting about the fact that many of our laws are still those inherited from the colonial era, I think this particular area deserves attention because, for instance, the National Human Rights Commission has been fighting for several years to change the criminalization of abortion. And that has been always a very contentious matter with Parliament, because you know, the usual arguments about how abortion is against the law of God or things like that. And so in the last 4 years, we have not made any progress at all on that head. So, that I think should, in that respect, the, I don't know, training, information sessions from the Parliamentary Forum would be most welcome, in that, you know, between parliaments, I think, a new voice could be more heard than that of the National Human Rights Commission. That, I think, is my contribution to this question part of the panel.
Thank you very much for your responses. Very pointed and informative. I wish to appreciate the kind words and commendation regarding the role of SADC, in particular SADC Parliamentary Forum, through the observer mission in Madagascar. Indeed, the election observation is one of our flagship programs, and we also view elections or participation in elections as one of the opportunities, not just to test the extent to which human rights are observed, but also the enjoyment of critical rights, such as rights on movement of people, expression, freedom of expression. We even see issues of participation, political participation, including representation, the question of gender equality. For the Parliament of Madagascar, it has not been a member of the SADC Parliamentary Forum for a while, but the good news is that they joined formally in December last year, 2019, and they've become a full member again. And in fact, when we had our plenary assembly on Friday and Saturday, 4th and 5th December, a member from the Parliament of Madagascar was elected as the vice president of the SADC Parliamentary Forum. And that must open doors for SADC-PF to be able to implement a number of interventions with and through the National Assembly of Madagascar. We actually, SADC-PF does roll out a number of capacity building interventions to parliamentarians, including or regarding the role of Parliament in the promotion and protection of human rights. Part of our partnership with Amnesty International relates to building the capacity of parliamentarians at national and regional level in terms of the role of Parliament and their only roles as individual members in promoting, enhancing the role of Parliament in promoting and protecting human rights. So your intervention is a challenge that you have put to us, the committee, and I can assure you the leadership of the committee being present in the meeting, and also the Secretary General being present in the meeting. We will be reflecting on this post the meeting, and we should be able to start to roll out capacity development programs with the National Assembly of Madagascar. At this juncture, we have concluded this session unless someone else wants to say something.
Mr. Chairman, right?
Mr. Chairman, can you, moderator, just a small correction. I will be unfair if I do to my own country and to myself. I do not make this correction. When I
by all means,
yes,
Advocate Waters.
Thank you so much. We in Namibia, we do not have a substantive legislation, a standalone legislation prohibiting and criminalizing child marriage. But that is, it is a part of the Child Care and Protection Act. So the Child Care and Protection Act makes provision for prohibiting child marriage and the punishment thereof. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome, Advocate Waters. One of the things that I also wanted to highlight is that we should continue to explore how the national regional linkages can be strengthened in terms of national human rights institutions to also access part of the resolutions that are coming from SADC Parliamentary Forum to national parliaments or through national parliaments, so that also informs part of the program of action that can be rolled out between in the collaboration between national parliaments and national human rights institutions. Right now we have a region-wide project on sexual and reproductive health, under which the issues of child marriages and the implementation of the model law is quite an active subject, and we should be able to, from time to time, share information that is relevant to national human rights institutions. The Secretary General, in the opening remarks, also alluded to the establishment of the Regional Parliamentary Model Laws Oversight Committee. It is a committee of all chairpersons of SADC standing committees to monitor progress and learn from each of the member states' experiences on how we can enhance the domestication of the model laws in our member states. That too is a process that we would wish to link to national human rights institutions, so that at the very least we have access to some of the documentation that is emanating from those processes. I don't know if there is any further questions. In the absence of that, we have come to the end of the panel discussion, and also that concludes our morning session. We will break for lunch and convene. I see it's 12 o'clock. We're going to break at 12:30. Is it in order if I propose that instead of coming back at 13:30, we come back at 13:05 hours, so that we will be able to finish a bit earlier? Is that in order? I see the chairperson is diplomatically guided that we proceed as proposed. So let's reconvene. Let's have our lunch break and reconvene at 1 o'clock GMT +2. This will also help us to accommodate our colleagues in Madagascar who are a bit ahead of our time, so that they don't reach supper time while the meeting is still on. Thank you very much, and enjoy your lunch. Let's meet at 1 GMT +2. Thank you very much.
Mornings, is nog mornings. Ja, nie. Ons moet nou weer na 2 gaan, kan ek maar net afsit. 1 o'clock. Ek is in ieder geval, as ek hom nou afsit, en